Lovely. No, that was 2 Kings. You read exactly what was written on, or put there, but I had put 1 Kings on here, and it'll make much more sense when I read it. It's apologies for that, both to Lisa. Thank you. It was a lovely reading. I was just sitting there the whole time going, that's not what I picked. No, it's not your fault.
It's like the boarding school, the 70 days, the reading is none of the nuns, so they said, read this, and it had all those kinds of names in it. I was 7.
So I have to say, it seems like for the last 6 or 7 years that Roy and I have kind of tag teamed and taken turns on Epiphany. And when he asked me this year if I wanted to do it, I was like, I didn't have any Epiphany to talk about, so I didn't say anything for a while. And then I came back and I had some realizations. So I'm going to share that with you, along with a little bit of background on some things that I learned as I looked into this. So the title is called Epiphanettes, which is not a real word. I made it up. But it's the idea, epiphanies are these big realizations thundered by amazing signs from God. And we all have really important revelations, maybe not daily, but regularly, that are much smaller, that are our world, not the world. And I think those are as important, if not more important, to slow down and pay attention to. And so I actually, after I came up with this idea, I did a little research on what the church says Epiphany is. And the Catholic Church recognizes 3, and we sang about them in the song. And those 3 are the Epiphany of the Magi, and that's why I made you read the reading again, because 1, it's the Sunday before Epiphany, and 2, it fits, all right? So the Magi come by Christ child. We know that was recognized by something as big as a star in the sky. They're like, that's a big sign, right? And there's the Epiphany of the baptism of Christ, when a voice from the heavens comes down and says, "This is my true beloved Son." You know, you're like, that doesn't happen very often. The sky doesn't open up with a big voice. Like, I haven't heard an epiphany like that, and I don't think any of us have. And the last is the Epiphany of the wedding at Cana, which is not as big a sign, but I'll tell you, taking multiple barrels of water and turning them into really good wine, that's a pretty big sign. That takes some doing. And so those, if you think back to the song and you've got the insert, if you look, those are all reflected. And then the last verse, the first 2 verses introduce the 3 epiphanies. The last verse goes through all the other things that Christ did. There were manifestations of Christ as God. Turning the water into wine, healing the blind, healing the sick, raising the dead with Lazarus, all those things show up. Those are manifestations, and that's what Epiphany means, a manifestation, as a revelation. And they all were big events. And you think, even if we look at the Magi, there are many theories about what the star might have been. One of the most common, although it's been probably debunked as a historical thing, is that the star of Bethlehem was actually Halley's Comet last time it came to Earth. Because it was documented in Asian notations, because they had good. It was documented as approximately 12 BC that Halley's Comet last visited. And given the ambiguities of when BC actually started and Christ actually started, that's a reasonable thing to think that
Haley's coming.
I don't know how many of you
20 years
20
ago,
years ago, or oh God, it's almost 30 years ago now, when Haley's comet was
in
in
the
the
sky.
sky, I saw it.
But
But it did look an awful lot like the ideas of Bethlehem, and it was pretty much in the same area of the sky, but moved a little bit each day until it kind of reset. And so I kind of believe that one, but and that was truly moving for me as a sign from the heavens. We don't get those very often. Those come every 2,000 years, and I would like to think that God speaks to all of us a lot more often. Maybe not with sending his son, but with things that are important to us to make us better.
And that's
what I would like to open you up to. And when I started thinking about this, I was reminded of a couple of quotes, or a couple of things that I've heard a lot in my life. One that I heard when I was young and my grandmother was alive,
and
one that I hear here all the time from numerous people, although the one who I hear say it most is not here with us today.
the one from my
grandmother is, don't sweat the small stuff.
And it's all
small stuff.
and I
I know that's not her saying, but I heard it a lot from her, and it basically came to mean to me that
pay attention
to the small things, but don't let them
mess with
your life.
And
then
Garrison,
Garrison, among others here, is
very
fond of saying, focus on that still small voice. Listen to that still small voice. And that's where I imagine our personal
messages
from God are, our personal revelations. We have to shut up and listen.
We have to
We have to get out of our own way and pay attention to what's there. And so that's what I want to focus on. And the reason I picked the 1 Kings 19, which I will read to you, was because I didn't know where the still small voice came from. I honestly thought Jim had come up with it on his own because I heard it from him so often. But I thought maybe there's a scriptural reference to it. And so I looked it up. I looked up still small voice in scriptural studies and found out it's only in the King James Version. So I'm going to read that part of the King James Version, and then I'm going to read the one that we would have read today, which is why I don't think I'd ever heard still small voice. So in the King James Version, 1 Kings 19, 11 through 13, and he said, "Go forth, and stand upon the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by. And a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. The Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, a still small voice. And it was so when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out, and stood in the entering of the cave, and behold, there came a voice unto him and said, What dost thou here, Elijah? And while the poetry of the still small voice in that one line is wonderful, I find the old language of King James harder to translate into my thing, so I have to read to you the NIV version that makes sense, but doesn't have that wonderful poetic still small voice in it. Then he was told, Go stand on the mountain at attention before God. God will pass by. A hurricane ripped through the mountains and shattered the rocks before God, but God wasn't to be found in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but God wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, a gentle and quiet whisper. When Elijah heard the quiet voice, he muffled his face with his great cloak, went to the mouth of the cave, and stood there. A quiet voice asked, So Elijah, now tell me, what are you doing here? And that's where I thought about it. All the big signs, all the Epiphany signs, the star, the voice from the heavens, the magic of changing things. In 1 Kings it says, that's not where God is. God's in that still, small, quiet whisper, that still small voice that you have to stop and pay attention to hear. And that's why I put in, because I'm not a big meditation person, but that's why I put in during prayer time today, let's just stop and have a little quiet time to listen to the prayers that you want to bring forth. Because you have to stop and listen. And God knows I'm not good at that. But I want you to think about some things with that. So I'll give you an example from my own life that I think is an epiphanette. When I first started teaching, I was manic, I would say. I had to give the perfect lesson every day. I worked, and I would be planning until midnight, and I'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning and change things, and it was killing me. And one day I just stopped and I said, I'm going to show a movie today. And no, it was a movie that had something to do with things. It wasn't a feature film, but it was a video, and I could tie it to it. And it was one of the best, most connecting lessons I'd had in a while. And I kind of sat back and paid attention to how things worked and how relaxed I had been in doing it. And I said to myself, you know, you don't have to be perfect every day. You just have to do the best you can do that day. And sometimes that's amazing, and sometimes it's just barely getting by. But as long as you are doing the best you can every day, it's good enough. And I have since shared that with new colleagues of mine, and I've had several come back. One is still my colleague, and he reminds me of it almost yearly. He's like, you know, when you sat me down my first year and said, you don't have to be perfect every day. Sometimes you just do what you can. He's like, that's gotten me through more days. And so the small pay attention to myself revelation for me, passing on to others, made their life better. And I honestly think I'm a better teacher for relaxing and just when I have a brand new idea that sounds really cool, yeah, go for it. And when I don't, I go with what I know is going to work. But it took stepping back from my mania and listening and being quiet. And so I want to take a minute to prep you all for talkback. I'm going to take a moment of quiet for everybody to listen to your own still small voice. And see if you can think of any epiphanettes, revelations in your life, big or small. They are ets. They're small. But take a moment or two and just think about that. And then I'll end with a poem, and we'll start talk back. Take a minute to think if you have